I'm not here to tell you that Super Mario 64 is overrated because that's cringe. I was born the year this game came out, so I didn't grow up with it. In fact, purely for context's sake, the first time I ever actually played a Mario game was in 2020 when I bought a Nintendo Switch to fight the lockdown blues. And that first Mario game I played was Super Mario Odyssey. And as an adult man in the post-PS4 age, I was pretty blown away by just how incredible that game was. Nintendo's character properties didn't really have the same hold on the UK market as they did in North America and Japan, with consoles like the Commodore 64, the Sega Mega Drive, and the PlayStation being more popular choices in the UK. And Nintendo's popularity in the UK only really exploded with the advent of the Nintendo Wii, with Nintendo being most recognized over here for games like Wii Sports and Wii Fit. Hence, I grew up with the Sega Mega Drive and the PlayStation 2 as a kid before moving on to the Xbox 360. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Some idiot who wasn't there at the time this game actually made its impact on the world to witness that firsthand, saying that it's not really all that and a bag of chips is just reductive. There are all kinds of videos on here on why Super Mario 64 is overrated, and this isn't one of those. Heck, I object to the use of the term overrated anyway, purely because that would imply that I am the authority on the standards of a game I never grew up with, and that those who see its merits more than I do are somehow wrong. So no, I'm not here to say it's overrated or bad. Can you imagine how embarrassing that would be for me and all of us? Fuck. The best, most succinct way I can put it is like this. Super Mario 64 is effectively the Citizen Kane of gaming. So I studied film at university, and I vividly recall the lead-up to us watching Citizen Kane for our film history module. Citizen Kane has a reputation as the greatest movie ever made, quote-unquote, and there's rarely much elaboration made on that point. It's just kind of a buzz phrase now. Citizen Kane is the best movie ever. And as such, when we finally watched Citizen Kane as a class, I recall many of the students found the film, quote-unquote, boring.
You're boring, everybody! Quit boring everyone!
And didn't get its reputation at all. It was kind of up to the students to do the research as to why the film has this status, and it was probably in the reading somewhere, which I didn't do because who the hell has the time or just wing it. But the reason for Citizen Kane's reputation is because of its unique narrative structure, innovative cinematography, and complex themes. Rather than telling the story in a linear fashion, Citizen Kane opts to tell its story via flashbacks and unreliable narrators. You've got the use of long takes, expressive lighting, low-angle shots, and shallow depth of field in the cinematography, and you've also got the themes of power and humanity in the narrative. Now, what you're probably thinking is, okay, lots of films have that. What makes Citizen Kane so special? And it's that Citizen Kane was the first film of its kind to do all this. And without Citizen Kane, all those films you're thinking of to one-up Citizen Kane probably wouldn't exist as you know them today. But because the conversation is so drenched in the hype of its incredible status, a lot of newcomers can't really appreciate Citizen Kane within the context that made it special. Its flattering status has effectively cast the film in an unflattering light for newcomers that will find it to be overrated. Personally, I like Citizen Kane, and I think it does hold up, but yeah, its reputation requires a great deal more context and nuance than the conversation typically gives it. Super Mario 64, like Citizen Kane, is considered one of the greatest of its kind. It's considered one of the greatest video games ever made, because it was one of the first 3D platformer games to abandon tank controls, offering freedom in the movement system that the level structure complements with its free flow, and on top of all of that, it does it in a way that ultimately holds up pretty well. But I think there is a conversation to be had about Super Mario 64's status as a quote-unquote timeless classic as well. And a lot of this is probably just going to end up being meditation on the word timeless. As you can tell by how I just unpacked the term overrated, I've got a problem with words, it seems. And I'm here to air that dirty laundry in relation to Super Mario 64, because I didn't think this timeless classic is really all that timeless. Not from where I was sat. So, shortly after playing Super Mario Odyssey, the Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection was announced, and I was eager to check out the back catalog of Mario games for a multitude of reasons. Perhaps I'd get another gaming experience like Super Mario Odyssey, plus I was aware of Super Mario 64, that it's heralded as revolutionary and one of the best games ever made, and I wanted to experience that for myself. I went through a similar thing after beating Sonic Unleashed as a kid and going back to check out the rest of the Sonic games. I remember falling head over heels in love with Sonic Adventure, despite it being a little primitive in parts. But I've always been able to look past the primitive, maybe even appreciate the primitive. As long as it feels good to play, I don't mind if the visuals are sparing with their polygon counts. But my experience checking out Super Mario 64 was absolutely nothing like my experience with Sonic Adventure. Rather than being gripped by the game, I was just confused and frustrated. Now do keep in mind Super Mario 64 is an older game than Sonic Adventure, and it does show. There are a lot of games that I can pick up and play today as though the game had just released and have a great time with, such as the classic Sonic games or Klonoa. However, I do think a lot of 2D games generally age better than the 3D ones because movement is just inherently simpler in 2D. But there are plenty of 3D games that I can effectively play like their out-of-the-box experiences today. Banjo-Kazooie, the original Spyro trilogy, the Crash Bandicoot trilogy. Even if I'm not so fond of the Bandicoot compared to the others, I can safely say the overall gameplay experience is a timeless one. Super Mario 64 is comparatively a clumsy, clunky experience. Now, there's a lot with Super Mario 64 that was still familiar to me having only played Super Mario Odyssey. Long jumping, that big backwards jump, the triple jump, it's all there. But while for Super Mario Odyssey, you only really needed to master these moves to get certain moons, boasting a high skill ceiling but a low skill floor, Super Mario 64 has a far higher skill floor involving much more of those basic fundamental abilities. Control of the character is everything in this game, from handling tight turns to coordinating your jumps, with numerous special challenges that serve to put these individual abilities to the test, and that's something I can safely say is very cool and enduring about Super Mario 64. They've absolutely packed this, at the time, new 3D Mario with different abilities to where individual challenges can be pretty basic, but it's all up to the player to handle this character. In that regard, he's a lot more Sonic than Mario, all things considered. Momentum factors into pretty much every aspect of your moveset, whether it's jumping, turning, or attacking. You can even traverse these levels a little faster by making use of your roll, like Sonic. It doesn't use its momentum purely in service of speed the way Sonic does, but it is undoubtedly a momentum-based platformer. There's a ton to admire about this game. Non-linear sandbox levels filled with objectives that let the player pick and choose which route to complete the story they'll take was an inspired choice that gets the most out of this incredibly packed player controller. And because Mario is full to the brim with moves, there are numerous different ways you can approach these objectives, meaning that no two playthroughs of this game will be the same. For one of the first 3D platformers to move away from tank controls, Super Mario 64 is effectively part 3D platformer, part parkour simulator, and that's genuinely incredibly commendable, especially for the time. But here's the thing. I play games to have fun, and my experience playing Super Mario 64 consisted mostly of grief, and I'm left at a crossroads for my judgment of this game. Are these individual elements held back by the times? Is it an unrefined experience? Is this timeless classic not so timeless after all? Or does the game just kind of stink? At this point, I have a choice to make. Am I going to become that big brain YouTuber that calls the best game ever somehow bad? Or do I choose another agenda? There are aspects of Super Mario 64 that I do consider to have aged really well, and that's partly due to the great execution on the game's part and pop culture trends this game would have no way of predicting. For example, graphically speaking, Super Mario 64's primitive, low-poly, disconnected models could easily pass for a conscious art style decision today, because while it's a crunchy, low-poly adventure with no real lighting engine so to speak, it still looks appealing. Good art direction will rarely date. If something looks pleasing to the eye in 1996, chances are it will still look appealing today. You could release a game that looks crunchy and low poly and call it a retro art style. In fact, there are plenty of games that do exactly that. Mainly indie projects, as investors still tend to shy away from this, but there's a clear appeal to this style, and I think it still looks nice today, in a way that I still think the classic Sonic games still look great today. Because of that, this to me is actually one of the timeless elements of the game, despite this being the first thing that will jump out to players, and one element that is noticeably different to later Mario titles. The music as well. Yes, it's all synthetic and produced by the Nintendo 64 sound chip, and you can tell. My bad, folks, it's not a sound chip. It was all just part of the CPU. Despite it edging just that little bit more towards sounding like real instruments than previous games. But the tunes are great and the instruments are thoughtfully chosen, so it still has that lasting appeal. I am making a conscientious effort not to relate this to Sonic, as with Sonic 1 being the first video game I ever played and Sonic being my favorite video game character, I'm naturally inclined to compare things to Sonic, and I really don't want to do that too much, but it's like the tunes in the classic Sonic games. It doesn't matter that they're produced within the limitations of the Sega Mega Drive sound chip, because those sounds have been excellently chosen and the melodies are top-notch. It's what happens when you've got incredibly skilled people working within limitations, and the same absolutely rings true of Super Mario 64's soundtrack. But the gameplay experience of Super Mario 64 largely consists of play around the castle grounds and have a whale of a time with the traversal system, be confused but accepting of Lakitu's static camera angles, I mean, how bad can it be? Proceed to overshoot numerous jumps, get kicked out of the level, slide off the edge of the level, get kicked out, fall to your death, get kicked out. I'm not even sure what actually happened here. Get kicked out of the level. Practice for a bit, win the star, get kicked out. Ask your gamer friends for advice. Turns out you're playing it wrong because you need to play it on a Nintendo 64 controller as the game is designed around it, bro. Look for Nintendo 64 controllers to play on your Switch, but uh-oh, that's not the same thing. Go play Sonic Adventure for a bit. Hell yes, Sonic Adventure is so good. Return to Super Mario 64. Just sit and ponder, do I deserve nice things like this? Is this too much power for me? I don't understand why I'm not having the magical timeless experience that everyone else is having, and I want to understand. How can this be one of the greatest games ever made when I actively don't enjoy any of the levels past the ground floor? Heck, past Bob-omb Battlefield. How can this be one of the greatest games ever made when the overwhelming emotions are frustration and confusion? And so, to find out, I made use of the valuable resources I have in real life. And one of my favorite resources is Garrulus64, who I'm going to refer to by his real name, Dilnor.
So my friend Pup, he says to me, hey, I'm making a Super Mario 64 video, do you want to do a little recording for it? And I say,
how have you not told me this before? Now I am Super Mario 64.
I'm gonna start this out by saying I am 29 years old. I was born in 1996, which is the same year that Super Mario 64 originally released, and the reason I tell you that is because I don't want you to think this is all just nostalgia pandering. I literally didn't grow up with this game. I grew up alongside it, and then we found each other later in life. It came in the form of me checking out my friend's Nintendo 64 when we were both probably 6 or 7 years old. At that time, the GameCube was out, and I was much more interested in that because Super Mario Sunshine and Pikmin looked, beautiful. And here I was seeing things like Paper Mario, which I was very confused about, like, why was he paper? Did Bowser do that to him? And my friend honestly said to me, I think that was what the intro cutscene was. So we didn't have very much going for us at the time. And then Super Mario 64, which just really intrigued me in a way I didn't understand, but I really couldn't stand it the first time I played it. It's just those controls, man, you know? Fast forward a little while and I get a Wii, and Virtual Console would bless me with Super Mario 64 yet again, which I would play this time with a GameCube controller. Again, I don't think I put a ton of time into it, but I was definitely more interested in it this time around than the last time. So somewhere between the last thing and this next thing, I also played Super Mario 64 DS, and it was so unremarkable apparently that I completely forgot to include it until now. This is actually an addendum, but I did 100% that game as well, and I do think it's sort of similar to my point with this, but I prefer the original still. And finally, this is the funniest part, I think. My first ever 100% playthrough of Super Mario 64 was on a MacBook Air that my high school gave me. I was just really bored, and they didn't figure out how to use like the security software for the laptops yet to keep us off of certain sites, so I was playing Mario 64 and other games most times in class and, on my breaks. Got all 120 stars on a keyboard, which is awful, let me tell you. I have no idea how I managed that. And from there, I realized why I didn't click with the game before then. You see, the difference was the MacBook playthrough was something I stuck with to the very end. I 100%ed the entire game. And that meant I had spent a very long time with those controls. Basically what I'm trying to get at is, all of my previous attempts at the game didn't give it enough time for me to understand how to actually play as Mario, how to feel like Mario. Since this time I went for the 120, I put in enough time that I fully understood how Mario moved. I totally understood how far he could go with each kind of jump. I understood how to wall jump and do it effectively. I figured out the glitches, I figured out the faults, I figured out how to get stars really easily. It turned something that looks obtuse from the outside to something that's actually a fascinating game of stringing together all of your movements in such a way that you feel good getting these stars. I told Pup the other day, this is basically a skateboarding game, where you just need to know your moves and when to use them at what time, and then you're gonna be shredding all over this place. It is so fun once you have command of this game. That's what it comes down to with this game. Understanding the controls and giving yourself enough time to actually understand how and when to use each move. Is the game overhyped? Yes. Is it overhated? Yes. It's a bit of a paradox because it's one of those games where the more time you put into it, the more you get out of it. But that's even easier to do now that we have the Super Mario 64 Co-op Deluxe PC port. And also the trillions of Mario 64 ROM hacks that are still coming out to this day because the game has been decomped, recomped, modded to hell and back. Like, we know everything about this game. This game is now a playground for not only the game player, but also the modders. But more specifically, the Co-op DX PC port is a marvelous bit of technology that allows you to play Mario 64 online with friends all over the world. Not only does it have access to the main Mario 64 game, but people are also able to port over ROM hacks, so you can see some of those other famous levels and also play them with your pals. It has a lot of extra game modes as well, so it's almost like a Gary's Mod type playground at this point. This also comes with the benefit of adding quality of life mods and features such as widescreen, upgraded frame rate, better textures, different models, tons of new player characters you can play as with movesets and without, which has enabled us to have our silly little avatars in-game, which, contrary to popular belief, does actually make it a lot more fun. I think that's part of the reason Pup has stuck to the game as long as he has to actually learn how to play it like he has, and he's been doing good, so give him some props. There's a huge meme in the Mario 64 community that every copy of Mario 64 is personalized, but that's actually true these days, because if you're playing Co-op Deluxe, you can really set this game up the exact way that you want it to be played, and you can sort of ease the game into supporting your playstyle, rather than having to, force your standards back to that of 1996. And while that may not be a purist standpoint about the game, you're still playing Mario 64 at the end of the day. A game from 1996 that people care about enough to keep bringing back, despite Nintendo's wishes, to the point where we now have the perfect place for people to learn and experience this game alongside your friends, or perhaps even your enemies. Just go play Super Mario 64 Co-op Deluxe with your friends, and if you don't click with it right away, just give it some time. You will. And then you're gonna have something that is never gonna stop getting content, and as time goes on, you're only gonna enjoy it more.
So I basically took the opportunity to have Dilnor64 guide me through Super Mario 64 using Super Mario 64 Co-op, and truth be told, we did have mods, yeah, I admit it, but I specified purely cosmetic mods only so we can still get that full, true Super Mario 64 experience, albeit with Klonoa and Milhouse from The Simpsons. Dilnor taught me some tips and tricks, and I had a notably better experience. Now, admittedly, having a buddy to talk to is always going to improve any non-narrative gaming experience, but things just clicked a little better. One of the things I had trouble with was making little nuanced movements, such as trying to align myself with the hint sign to read it. But Dilnor pointed out that simply walking, taking literal baby steps, was the key to achieving maneuvers like this, and it was a huge help. I was pretty inspired by the character mods I saw for the game, which inspired me to, with Dilnor's help, mod a channel pup into the game. And then when I played it all over again by myself just to get footage of that, this game really shone. The movement system of this game is truly excellent. Sure, there's a learning curve to it, but once you get it down, it's truly spectacular. Making massive leaps and bounds, finding ways to skip parts of the level with Mario's capabilities. And I found myself coming back to Super Mario 64 co-op both by myself and joining the fellas whenever they were playing a game, and I was having such a great time. Super Mario 64 lends really well to co-op, giving players a chance to divide and conquer as far as the stars go. You can strategize, which is really fun, and that also adds a new layer to the level of freedom that Super Mario 64 already boasts. In the $10 and above tier, we have Gosh Darn It, with great power. Just another evil robot clone seeking revenge. Xanderwolf, Ghostly Phantom, Twilord, KB, Sad Goku, Dare Danny, Gail Bennett, we got the free pizza in the Patreon, and Mr. SP, Suris the Skeptic, Biotin. And then in the $5 and above tier, we got Gideon Wells, Goober, Christopher, Reese Burns, Manalza, Goat Cannon, Litzy, Silver, Josh Strider, Grant Allen, Zach Brakowski, Marv Animation, Coco210, Cho Henshin, RT0, Carlex, SSS06, Ken K, and Vera Wild. Thank you folks so much for your generosity, and back to the video. With this newfound confidence in the gameplay, I returned to Super Mario 64 over on my Nintendo Switch because I wanted to complete it officially, and, well, it was a revelation, alright. I am still running into the same damn pitfalls. Precision is still an absolute pain in the leg, and I was just feeling kinda stressed out. And there are two culprits in this. One of which is indeed the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. Their dinky analog sticks don't allow the same level of precision as my Xbox Series S controller that I used when playing Super Mario 64 co-op. But it was here where I found the game's secret main villain. Not Bowser, but Lakitu. Now, Lakitu may look like a friend. He looks like my friend even. He looks like Garrulus64. But he deserves a Razzie for his camera work. Lakitu is more like Slakitu in this department. See, one quality of life feature added to Super Mario 64 co-op is a modern camera system, which is not present in the Nintendo Switch or any official version of Super Mario 64. Super Mario 64's camera being garbage is not exactly a revelation, but I think it does need to be stressed just how much this impacts the rest of the gameplay experience. Of course, I do want to meet it on its own terms to some extent. Lakitu's camera angles are made to look kind of dramatic and exciting. It gives a clear picture of where Mario is going. Now look, anyone that's played that Snake Challenge in Sonic Adventure knows the importance of good camera angles in gameplay, but it's so much more important than you'd initially realize. Now, obviously, we didn't quite have dynamic cameras down yet at this stage in gaming history. Games like Jumping Flash were pushing boundaries in this department, but the kind of dynamic moving cameras we take for granted today wouldn't really start to emerge until Tomb Raider in 1996, mere months after the release of Super Mario 64. But there's so much we take for granted with cameras today in video games. Imagine playing Insomniac's Spider-Man, but with only 8 directions of camera movement, and being unable to look up and down while on the go. Heck, not only do modern gaming experiences come with precise, nuanced camera movements, we even treat it to cinematic cameras. Cameras that lock onto our targets, giving us the best possible views. Sonic games today do away with camera control entirely in their action sequences, as the camera moves automatically to show you what to focus on, and it works well. So going back to a video game with only a handful of camera angles is naturally going to be a jarring experience that will impact the flow of gameplay. Now, bless its heart, Super Mario 64 does offer an alternative, and that is to pass the camera from Lakitu to Mario, and now a third of the screen is taken up by Mario's head, which really isn't much better, but this can be zoomed out as well. Perfect, right? Well, not really, as its collision constantly gets into fights with the level geometry, and it is pretty slow to react. Another way the developers have remedied this is to give Mario a permanent drop shadow, so you always know where Mario is going to land. But for all these concessions, we've got however many different camera options, and none of them are good. The field of view is far too low, and I get that this was probably to show off Mario's character model to some extent, but it's hard to really get a sense of just how far you'll need to jump, which leads to overshooting. And the camera is angled too low, meaning you don't really get a useful view of the level geometry ahead, kinda nullifying drop shadows. I can appreciate that the developers of Super Mario 64 were working within the constraints of existing between revolutionary technological breakthroughs in 3D gaming, and Super Mario 64 was one of those breakthroughs in a number of ways, but there were still various ways the fixed camera could have worked a lot better than it did. As someone who didn't grow up with this camera style, this genuinely ruined the Super Mario 64 experience for me, as it impacted all corners of the gameplay experience. We've got this incredible movement system with well-designed levels, but it's all in the most unflattering camera angles possible because Lakitu needs to go back to film school. And I can forgive that within the context of the time. There's really not much use in trying to rationalize criticizing a 1996 game with the standards of 19 years later, but then let's take a look at the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, which is how I played this game. Now, I didn't really do a whole lot of research into the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection at the time I bought it. As far as I was concerned, I'd played Super Mario Odyssey, and I wanted to try some earlier titles, and the Switch was the only Nintendo device I had at the time, so I decided to pick it up. I know a lot of the die-hard fans steered clear of this collection due to its price point, the principle of making it a limited release, and a consensus that this was a lazy compilation, and fair enough. I don't have the knowledge or perspective to verify the validity of that, so just fair enough. And look, these games have had a teeny bit of remastering in this collection too. Higher quality textures, HD HUD elements all across the board, with the games running at higher resolutions than their original counterparts. They have been given some quality of life improvements, but I think to make Super Mario 64 accessible to newcomers, they needed to include the option of a more modern camera system. There are probably a lot of newcomers to this collection who wrote off Super Mario 64 because of the impact that the antiquated camera system has on the gameplay. Nintendo will sue 20-year-olds over their fan projects.
Thank you, Super Mario Bros. The only thing you haven't drained is my bank account.
Fake-ass bitch. But those fan projects include modern camera system options that Nintendo clearly can't be arsed with. Rather than fight back against fan developers with lawsuits, why not be productive and fight back against them by making official alternatives with just as many, if not more, quality of life options for new players? I appreciate preservation as much as the next guy, keeping the original experiences intact and readily available, but this isn't the original experience. You've already improved the textures and UI elements, and playing it on a Nintendo Switch controller is just fundamentally going to be a different experience when controlling a character with this many nuances. That, and something closer to the original experience, is already available on the Nintendo Switch Online service. If they wanted to bring this game to the Switch, they really needed to add like a walk button or something to compensate for the tiny analog sticks on the Joy-Cons. Again, at least make that an option. Heck, why isn't the game in 16:9? Why does that option not exist? So again, is Super Mario 64 timeless? Not when Nintendo have done the absolute bare minimum to bring that experience to modern audiences. Fan developers have done more to nurture this game than Nintendo ever have. Say what you will about Sega re-releasing the classic Sonic games a million billion times when there's the adventure games right there, but at least they added quality of life improvements to create definitive versions of these games. Would you really want to go back to playing Sonic 1 but without the spin dash? Without the save system? Is that really the experience you'd want to bring to new generations? So why are we forced to go back to Super Mario 64 with the same antiquated camera system? Well, let's check back in on Citizen Kane real quick. For the sake of modern audiences, should you colorize Citizen Kane? Upscale it to 4K, 16:9? Well, that's basically equivalent to what Nintendo did with Super Mario 64 DS. A Nintendo DS remake of Super Mario 64 with updated character models, boo, additional playable characters, groovy, and a versus mode, boo. You start the game as Yoshi and have to unlock Mario? What? And no, it doesn't address the camera issues, and the turning is effectively worse and... Stop. I'm not asking Nintendo to remake Super Mario 64. That's unnecessary. There's a lot about this experience that holds up. Too much to just remake it. The character models included. By all means, offer modernized versions as an option in a re-release for those who prefer it, sure. But all this isn't necessary to bring the Super Mario 64 experience up to date. It's literally just the camera and a walk button. That's all a re-release of this game truly needs. I can live without 16:9, but then again, why should I? I can live without HD textures and HD UI. Just let me experience the game in the best way possible. Heck, even then, I'm not playing hardball here. I think the old style of camera should be available as an option for the old school players, but I guarantee the only people that would leave that enabled are massive attention seekers. I barely even mentioned just getting kicked out of the level when beating it, and losing as well. And yeah, I'd appreciate if something could be done to address that too. But I get why it happens. You have to load certain elements into these levels. Maybe just ditching the redundant live system would be enough. I'm not demanding perfection here, although of course I'd say I appreciate it. In re-releasing Super Mario 64 as it is in the Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection, Nintendo haven't even done the bare minimum to make this game approachable to modern audiences. The appeal of Super Mario 64 is enduring enough for me to want the best possible version of this experience, and to keep me coming back to the improved PC fan projects available online. The game still deserves its admiration for what it achieved at the time back in 1996, but it's hard to consider this whole package as timeless when there are so many aspects to this title that gaming has moved on from, and rightfully so. Right now, I can safely say that Super Mario 64 is a timeless landmark in gaming, but as far as official Super Mario 64 experiences go, it's not a timeless experience. I think the gaming community does need to try to be a little more understanding of the frustrations of newcomers when it comes to this title, because Super Mario 64's timeless status is absolutely achievable, but Nintendo are yet to give us a timeless version of this game. The video's over, get out.